I want this recorded. All right, there we go. So I'm going to test it out on you guys tomorrow. And this is what I'm going to test, okay? Now, if you look at, let me see, I'm going to look at student view and see what you guys see. Okay, so there's a new choice over here on the left, and it's called discussions, okay? We used it once last semester when I was going to be gone for a day, but I still kind of kept in touch with you guys. We used it just to have you guys check in and take roll. What I've done is I've set up a discussion for this class for tomorrow, okay? And I'm going to try and play as if I were the sub. And so I have it right here. It's called the substitute teacher test run, okay? And hopefully the guy will be able to figure this out. I'll lay it all out, you know, step by step with the guy. But it's going to have a video attached to it, and it's locked until tomorrow, so we can't see the whole thing. Oh wait, I can leave student view and you can see it. Okay, so basically what will happen, what I'm thinking will happen if we do it this way, is that the sub, you guys will come in and you'll reply with your name as soon as you come into class, and that's how they can take roll. And then the sub can kind of tell you what's going on for the day. And it's probably just going to be videos. I mean, I'm not letting them out in the shop to do anything. So they'll start the video and blah, blah, blah. So actually, no, that won't work. You guys are going to have to start the video on your own. In other words, the sub will sit here and go, okay, I've taken roll. So why don't you guys go ahead and start the video? And afterwards, whatever, however the guy wants to run it, I don't really care how he runs it. So I'm thinking that might be really, honestly, the easiest way to do it, but I'm going to try Big Blue Button as well. I've got a problem with one of my classes that's first and fourth period, but all the kids are grouped in the same section. So if I can straighten that out, then we'll just do Big Blue Button. If not, then it's going to be this discussions thing. And I will let you guys know next week, maybe even tomorrow if I can get this fixed, which we're going to use, okay? But I just want to make sure this would work, so I did a test run with this class for tomorrow for this, okay? So kind of a, you know, freaky thing, but it's the way it goes. So I'll let you guys know more as I know more, and I'll remind you as often as I possibly can. The difficulty I'm going to have is there's a lot of students that kind of show up one day and don't show up for a while, then show up again, and they're just going to be out of luck, I guess. If they don't show up to class, they're just going to be out of luck. All right, so for today, all right, we have, let me go over here to, I guess I could have already done the modules. Come on. So just so you guys know, if you miss a class or something like that, I'm doing my best to get all the lectures or the whatever we do for that class taped and up here. So today what we've got is there's two different jointer videos, and I'm also trying to make sure that I put some sort of description under the day of the week that kind of tells you what's going on that day. I'm trying my best. I'm trying to be better at this. So there's two different jointer videos today. And yes, we're covering the jointer quite a bit, but it's an important machine. I want to spend some time this quarter really going over in depth some of the machines and some other processes for you guys. So these two jointer videos are somewhat different. Different opinions in regards to how to do certain things. And that's why I picked these two. I'm going to, just so you don't freak out, from time to time, there's a couple different places in these videos where I'm going to pause the video because I want to make a comment about it, okay? So don't freak out if the video pauses. And I want to be able to say what I'm trying to tell you guys instead of type it into the chat, okay? So we're going to take a look at the first one here. The second one's really short. The first one's a little longer than the second one is. And I'm going to pause it from time to time again to make a comment because I like to hear myself talk, all right? So let's go ahead, and once again, if you guys have issues with the audio or something like that, let me know in case I click the wrong button or something like that, okay? Just let me know in the chat if there's a problem. So here we go. So I'm getting some folks tell me they can't hear sound. Does anybody hear sound on the video? Okay, so I'm gonna restart it because I'm a doofus. And I know why. I don't know why I'm a doofus. I know why you couldn't hear sound. Okay, I'm sorry about that, folks. Here we go.
Today's video is a big one and a subject I've gotten a lot of questions on over the years, the jointer. We all know the saying, start square, finish square, and the jointer takes no prisoners. If it isn't set up right or you're using the wrong technique, you won't end up square and you'll be left with nothing but frustration. So let's go over how the jointer works and techniques to get perfectly straight and square material. For this video, I've removed some of the safety guards to show how the jointer works. Make sure you use all safety guards with your jointer. There are 4 main parts to the jointer: the in-feed table, the out-feed table, the fence, and the cutter head. Now this video is not about setting up your jointer. That will be another video. But before you use the jointer, here's what needs to be done. First is to make sure the in-feed and out-feed tables are coplanar. That means when the in-feed table is at the same level as the out-feed table, both tables are in a straight line from one end to the other. When you lower the in-feed table, the tables are no longer coplanar, but they must be parallel. This is critical. Next, the knives must be set at the same height as the out-feed table, or within 1/1000ths higher. You do not want the knives set lower than the out-feed table. And last, you need to adjust the fence to 90 degrees. Now, before we go over techniques, it's important to understand how a jointer works. The in-feed table is lowered to the desired cut depth. As you pass the board over the knives, it removes material, allowing the out-feed table to support the workpiece. Note that the out-feed table does not fully support the material until it is completely flat. When we go over jointer technique, you'll see why this is very important to understand. Now let's look at the dynamics of the jointer. When you place the material on the table, you'll have the weight of the material and the friction against the surface to overcome. The force needed to move the material is in the horizontal direction. When the material contacts the knives, you will have multiple forces acting on the material in the vertical and horizontal direction. This means a little more force needs to be applied horizontally to counteract the knives, and a small force down over the knives, preventing the board from lifting up. The deeper the cut, the more counterforce you'll need to apply. Now, do you really need to know this to join a board? Yes, because the techniques we use must address these dynamics for the jointer to work properly. Before even turning on the jointer, we need to understand some basic wood terminology and properties, starting with the face. This is the wider, long grain section of a board, and the edge grain is the narrower, long grain section. Now let's look at the 4 main ways wood can warp, starting with a bow. This is warping caused along the grain on the face of the board, creating a shape like a bow. The side of the wood that is under compression is called the concave side, and the side that is under tension is called the convex side. Here's an example. I've drawn stress lines on this foam, which are straight and parallel to each other. When I bend the foam, you can see on the bottom where the lines compress closer together, and the top side, they stretch further apart, called tension. This doesn't mean the bottom is always in compression or that it's always the concave side. I can bend the foam upwards and the compression is now on top and tension on the bottom, making the top the concave side. Next is crook. This is a long grain bow along the edge of the board. The principles are the same for a bow and a crook. One is on the face and one is on the edge. Then you have a cup, which is a bow across the grain, still having all the same properties of compression and tension, just across the grain instead of with the grain. Last is the twist, causing the board to rotate the face out of plane. Now let's look at grain direction. Notice that the cutter head of the jointer spins clockwise from the outfeed table to the infeed table. This means you want the grain of the wood going clockwise from the top to the bottom of the board as you pass it over the jointer. If you go against the wood, you'll get a much choppier cut with more tear out. Going with the grain slices the wood with less tear out. When jointing a bowed board, you want the concave side down. This gives you 2 points of contact. If you have the concave side up, you only have 1 point of contact, making the board unstable. Another really important dynamic with the jointer is you must not distort the board as you run it over the knives. This can happen when you apply too much downward force. Remember, the only downward force needed is to counteract the knives pushing up, which isn't a lot. And if you distort the board, it will just spring back to its original shape and not be flat. Now, you've probably all seen these foam push sticks. They're practically in every jointer video and come with most jointers when you purchase one. Unfortunately, they are a big reason people have trouble getting boards flat. These pads require way too much downward force to move the material forward. And since we don't need very much downward force, any push stick you use should be designed to push the material forward. The board transfers the force.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong button once. This is one of the things I wanted to discuss with you guys and bring up. I disagree with this guy's philosophy on push pads and push sticks and things like that. When he uses this particular push stick with a hook on the end to grab the end of the board, the problem I have is there's nothing holding the front of the board down to the outfeed table. All his pressure is on the infeed table here. Now, a little later in the video, he shows a table saw push stick that he ground off to hold this down, but I disagree with this. I think that the pads we have, I think they hold the board well, and they allow you to put the right amount of downward pressure on the board without compressing that bow. And I don't think this particular push stick provides you with much help when correcting twist. Now, one of the things he does here, let's see if I can find out where it was. Okay, right here. I want you to notice something. There's quite a gap between the edge of the board and the fence. And when he starts talking about correcting twist, he says the way you do it is you put this edge right up against the fence. Well, we keep our board against the fence throughout the entire process. And here's why. The type of guard that we have is, I think it's called a clamshell guard or something like that, but it's spring-loaded and it springs away from the fence as the board is fed through it, right? You guys have all seen that. If you did it like this with our current guard, that would leave a gap between the edge of the board and the fence, which means there's exposed cutter head right there. The whole idea of a guard is to make it so there's no exposed cutter head for your hand to go down into, okay? So we always keep the edge of our board against the fence when we're jointing the face, okay? So there's a couple things here that I don't like. I mean, this guy's a complete and utter idiot if he's putting his hand here and there's not a guard in place, or if his board's in the center of this cutter head and there's a gap between the edge and the
force needed
he's just
is to counteract the knives pushing up, which isn't a lot. And if you distort the board, it will just spring back to its original shape and not be flat. Require way too much downward force to move the material forward. And since we don't need very much downward force, any push stick you use should be designed to push the material forward, like the one you see here. Hooking on the edge of the board transfers the force horizontally and not down. Jointing is actually a finesse job. A light controlled touch is the key. Here's how it should look. Start by identifying the concave side of the board. Then identify the face grain direction. This is done by looking at the edge of the board. The grain should be going down from the top of the board to the bottom
Somebody was saying they can't see the video. Well, okay. All right. Thank you for telling me.
Here's how it
Now
should
you should
look.
be able to.
Start by identifying the concave side of the board. Then identify the face grain direction. This is done by looking at the edge of the board. The grain should be going down from the top of the board to the bottom, facing the cutter head. Hook your push stick on the back end of the board and place your fingers lightly near the front of the board. You might have noticed I'm being very specific about the pressure. No matter what tool you're using, proper pressure is key. And it's not just about getting good results, it's also about safety. If you're pushing too hard or squeezing too tightly and something were to happen, all that force will be released, making it much more difficult to react and get out of the way of danger. So pay attention to that. It's easy to start tensing up when using machines. Now, if you don't feel comfortable putting your fingers on the board, that's okay. Just use a stick. If you watch the How to Make a Push Stick video, then you know the push stick that comes with your table saw is no good. But instead of throwing it out, you can modify it to work here. You don't need a lot of downward force, and the plastic will slide easily on the board, keeping your hands away from the knives. Then steadily move the board over the knives with your push stick while keeping slight pressure above the blade. Notice I'm not putting pressure on the outfeed side. That's because the board is not yet flat, and you could cause it to twist or bend slightly. Plus, now that you've seen how the jointer works, you can see there's no reason to do this. But wait, there is a situation where this technique can be helpful when jointing a twisted board. To prevent wasting a lot of wood or ending up too thin, you want to balance the twist. But this can cause the board to be unstable. Here's how to safely and accurately joint a twisted board. Once you balance the twist, move the edge of the board against the fence to help stabilize it.
All right, so this is what I was talking about. In the previous face jointing exercises, he had the board away from the fence. We can't do that. We're going to keep it against the fence. And my personal opinion in regards to repairing twists in a board with our pads that we use to hold it is to maintain pressure on the top of the board consistently with each pass through the jointer. Okay. It just, I mean, there's always more than one way to skin a cat, and I'm sure there's people that disagree with me, and there's people that would agree with this guy, and vice versa. But the way our guard is set up and the way we do things, it just doesn't work this way. We will never try to joint either the face of, we'll never try to joint the face of a board without also being in contact with the fence, because that would expose some of the cutter head without a guard over it. So that's one of those funky things.
And run it through the jointer. To ensure the material doesn't move, keep your push stick and hand in a fixed position through the whole pass. Taking a deeper cut on the first pass will help establish a reference surface quickly. Now that you have a flat reference on the bottom of the board, pass the board over the jointer as you normally would, keeping slight pressure
but look how close
over the
his
blade.
hand was to that
Now
cutter.
it's time to joint the edge of the board. One step I like to take before jointing the edge is to plane the other face of the board. This allows you to pick what edge you want to joint and still have the right grain direction. You might wonder, why can't you just joint the other side too? This is because the jointer makes a surface flat, but not necessarily parallel. The planer is designed to make a parallel surface referenced off the jointed face, and this is what we want. Now, before you joint the edge, you need to identify the grain direction. This is done by looking at the face of the board. Again, the grain will go from higher to lower, moving away from the cutter head. When you're checking the grain direction for the face, you look at the edge of the board. When you're checking the grain direction for the edge, you look at the face of the board. Now let's look at edge jointing dynamics. It's very similar to face jointing. You want most of your force pushing the board horizontally with only a little downward force to counteract the knives. The main difference is you need to apply enough force to keep the board flat against the fence. This is really important. The table is no longer the reference, only the fence. Ensuring the board stays against the fence is critical. You do not want to apply diagonal force from the top. This has a tendency to push the bottom away from the fence and can easily happen without you noticing it. You need to apply force in the center of the board against the fence. Here's how it looks. Start with the concave side down. Place your fingers on the board in the center and safely above the cutter head, pressing it flat against the fence and push it over the jointer. If the board is really narrow, use your push stick to feed the board and another push stick pressing the board against the fence before the cutter head. And that's how you accurately use your jointer. Now there is some skill involved in this process, and the more you do it, the better you will get. Just remember, the right amount of force is key and a light touch is all you need. Keep the concave side down and the material moving at a steady pace. When edge jointing, make sure you're flat against the fence, make yourself a good push stick, and don't use the foam pads. These tips and techniques should greatly improve your jointing experience. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time.
All right, so we're not going to use one of those silly looking push sticks. We're going to use our pads. There's some better pads available out there I'm trying to get a hold of. A couple of things. The guy ran that joiner with his hand an inch away from the cutter head a couple times, and I'm just thinking, wow, I just honestly cannot believe you still have all your fingers, dude. So he does have some very good tips and points in there that do follow the way we do things, okay? So this next one is a differing version. It's a little older, I don't know. I can't remember if there was a point. I think there was a point in there that I want to make a comment or two, but it's a pretty quick little video. Let's take a quick look at it and see what is going on.
A lot of woodworkers, when they're starting out, they go to the home center and they buy the pre-milled lumber, like this 1x4. And that's very convenient, but it can get a little bit expensive. And you're kind of limited in the types of species you can use. If you want to broaden your horizon, so to speak, find a wider variety of species you can build from, and perhaps even save a little money, you might consider instead going to buying rough sawn lumber like this. To bring rough sawn lumber like this into pieces you can use in your projects, you need to flatten it, square it up, and bring it to a consistent thickness. And that's where the jointer comes in. It's the first machine used in this process. The jointer is really a fairly simple machine. Take the guard off here and I'll show you. All there really is to the jointer is an infeed table, a cutter head here that has knives in it, and an outfeed table. The outfeed table is set so that it is exactly as high as the knives when they're at the highest point of their rotation. The infeed table is set just a little bit below the knives. So as the cutter head spins, the workpiece is fed across there. The knives take a little bite off the board, and that newly jointed face then rides on the outfeed table as you complete the cut. I'll put the cutter guard back on, and I'll show you how it works. Look at the end of the board and you can see the gap between the bottom face and the outfeed table caused by the crown in the board. And listen closely, you can hear spots where the cut is lighter than heavier. That's because some spots don't make contact with the cutter head yet, while others do. After one pass, you can see where cuts were made and where there's still work to be done. Marking the face with chalk shows us better. And I've got this one surfaced pretty close. I've got one small area up here that still needs to be flattened out a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about that for the time being. I'll take care of that with a planer later. Now that I've got one face that is flat, I want to joint one edge so that it's square to that face. And that's the other thing the joint.
Folks, we're going to do our best to flatten one face, then plane the opposite face, all right, and then we joint the edge, okay? And once again, if our board's too wide for the joiner, we're going to use the drum sander and a few very, very light passes to get a flat face for reference for the planer, okay? But yeah, I want both faces done before you joint an edge, okay? So that's one little thing on this one I don't like too much.
It does very well. This fence is set exactly 90 degrees to the cutters, so when I run my freshly jointed face up against that fence and joint this edge, those two surfaces end up perfectly 90 degrees to each other. As when jointing the face, you can hear where the knives cut the low spots and miss the high spots.
We will use a push pad to replace his left hand here. You will not do this with your bare hand on the board. What last thing you want to have happen is your hand to slip and go down between the edge of the board and the guard. So this will be a push pad at all times on this face of the board.
So there I have two faces ready to go. This edge is flat, and this edge is at a perfect 90 degrees to this face. The next step in the process is to finish up the opposite face and the remaining edge. And those two jobs are done at the planer and the table saw.
Okay, I do like the fact that he tells you at the end that once you get a face done and an edge done, then you go to the planer, then you go to the table saw, okay? We're going to do a little differently. We're going to do one face on the joiner, the opposite face on the planer, and then one edge on the joiner, and then the opposite edge on the table saw, okay? So I hope you kind of noticed some differences between the videos, and I hope you understood what I was saying when I tried to clarify some of the points. Once again, I'm going to remind you guys, okay, the week you come back after Thanksgiving break, November 30th through December 4th, I won't be here. I'm going to do everything I can to have everything set up and ready to rock. I'd like to do a trial run next week with just how the sub would do it, okay, so that we're all comfortable with it. I will be available via email over the course of the week. So at any time, if there's some issues getting into a class or knowing where to go, email me. I'll monitor my email so that I can answer your questions if need be, okay? So please do that. Don't just bail on the class and not show up, because the sub will be recording attendance for your 5 points each week of attendance, okay? So we will go over this again tomorrow. I'll try and get things as clear as mud by tomorrow, and hopefully next week we can do a little trial run on what it'll be like while the sub is here, okay? So that's gonna be it for today. Please make sure your name gets in the chat window for attendance. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow, okay? Bye, folks.